Hello, my name is Shirley Reeder. I'm an interviewer for the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. Today I am interviewing Bob Clasen, December 5th, 2006, at the Madeira Library. Our camera operator today is Robin Warner. Bob, I just wanted to talk to you a little about your experience in the Second World War. I guess we can start with how did you happen to be drafted?
Well, I was a senior in college at Miami. Graduation day was the 1st of June of 1942, and I had gotten a draft notice late in April or early in May, and I thought I wasn't going to be able to graduate. But
Gosh.
I went to the draft board and asked for a stay of induction, and they said no. So I resigned myself to the fact that it was going to happen. But then I got a notice giving me a 30-day stay, and then they didn't take me till November. So,
Well, that was great.
Yeah, I was happy to be able to finish school.
What were you majoring in?
Industrial management and
Okay.
general business.
But there were people that got drafted right out of college, right? They had to leave.
Indeed, yes.
Middle.
And many of my classmates joined the Navy or the Air Force or the Army. And, you know, it was just a year. We had Pearl Harbor.
Right, 42.
Our senior year, and so many of my classmates left, joining a naval or Air Force or Marine program.
Right, because if a person were to go ahead and join the Navy or the Marine Corps, then you would have the choice of the service to be in, as opposed to being drafted.
That's right.
Or you would probably go into the infantry, right, in the Army?
Well,
usually.
For me, I went into the field artillery. That's what they needed at the time.
Okay, so they drafted you into the field artillery.
Right.
And where did you go from there? You apparently went to Fort Thomas?
First to Fort Thomas, and then to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, Field Artillery Replacement Training Center. It was a regular Army post, but the replacement training center was for new recruits.
Okay.
And that's where I had basic training. And then, after my basic training, I was transferred to headquarters and headquarters battery, and I was used as a classification specialist to determine the raw troops that were coming in, what their military occupational specialty would be.
Okay. And is that a part of your work with the adjutant generals?
Well,
or did that come later?
That came later, but it comes under the adjutant general. My superior officer, when I was doing classification work, was an adjutant. He had graduated from adjutant general school.
Okay. So you were originally drafted for the field artillery, which essentially means tanks, doesn't it?
No.
Is that what that means?
No. It's the heavy weapons.
Heavy weapons.
Yeah.
Okay. So they did train you, I guess, in the heavy weapons, right?
I didn't get too much training in that. I went right from basic training to headquarters battery, where I did the interviewing work with the new recruits that were coming into the fort.
Right. And that was at what fort?
Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Okay.
Lawton, Oklahoma.
Okay. Do you think probably the fact that you had a degree in business maybe had something to do with, they thought this would something, in a sense they were looking at what you were good at?
That's true. Fortunately, I was able to finish college, and I had some background in personnel work, some of the things I did at school. And I was lucky to be chosen to go to Adjutant General's MCS. I feel very fortunate about that.
It was kind of a good assignment there, right?
Yes, it was.
They had a special OCS for that type of an officer as opposed to the general OCS?
Well, each arm of the service had their own. For
Gotcha.
example, the Armored Force has Armored Force OCS. The Field Artillery had their own OCS.
Okay.
As in general, just one other classification.
Okay. That would be, was that what, like about 90 days? That's what we always hear.
Well, there were 90-day wonders, but it happened to be 120 days for us.
Close.
We had to go one more month.
Okay. And then from there you went to the Adjutant General's.
From Fort Sill, I went to the Adjutant General School,
And
Fort
that
Washington,
Fort
Maryland.
Washington.
From August of 43 to December of 43. And then after the commission as second lieutenant, I was sent to Fort Sheridan.
Okay.
And then to Camp Barkley, Texas, where I was part of a beginning of a replacement company that they were putting together.
Oh, okay. So at that point, that would be your last location until you shipped out.
Right.
Did you know that you would end up going to Europe? Or
No, I had
you didn't
no
know
idea.
that you could have
No.
gone to the Pacific? Okay. Were you married at the time?
No.
Or not?
No.
Okay.
Single.
Well, that was pretty good. But it wouldn't have mattered if a person were married. I mean, that was just the way it was,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. I think there probably were some exemptions for those that were married and had certain obligations.
Maybe children and things like that. Yeah, the draft was for men from 18 to, it was, what, 29 or something?
I don't really
It was-
know what the top limit was.
Yeah. I think it was higher than most wars because they needed a lot of people. Can you tell us some of the things you did being in the Adjutant General's regimental group?
Well, some interesting things that I did at Fort Sill. We received the raw recruits, and some of them were really raw recruits. We had a group that were known as the Double Fives. They scored in the 5th quintile of the Army General Classification Test and the 5th quintile of the non-language test. So anyone that was in that category, the Army had to decide whether they could train them as soldiers or release them under what they call Section 8. So I did some classification things that included asking certain questions. And if you want to know some interesting things, I can remember I would administer a test that was 40 questions long. It was a series of 10 sets of 4 questions. The first of the 4 questions was an easier one to answer than the second, and the third and the fourth. And the second series was a little more difficult. And when you came to a point where a soldier failed on all 4 questions in a row, you stopped and you gave him a raw score. That was part of the questioning we did. And some of the questions that were answered, one of the questions I remember is, what are the 4 seasons of the year? And you'd get answers like hunting season, fishing season, Saturday and Sunday.
Isn't that
Truly,
something?
yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Another one that I remember very well, and this was pretty far down in the test, was what are hieroglyphics?
Yeah, that would have been
Yeah.
a more complicated
Yeah.
question,
Okay.
right? Gotcha.
But before that, just before that,
Oh, but
the
that-
question was, what is a harrow? And most of them knew what a harrow was. If you said it right, you had to say harrow, har. They would say, well, them's what you use on a farm. And then the next question was, what are hieroglyphics? And this one guy said, why, them's the teeth on a harrow. You can imagine that.
That's
Another
great.
one, why do we celebrate the 4th of July? And they'd almost all say, well, it's a holiday. And,
So,
and you weren't supposed to help them any, but I could remember saying, well, why is it a holiday? And I remember this one recruit, he was clutching his Bible, and he looked at me with pity in his eyes, and he said, why, that's God's birthday.
oh my gosh, isn't that something?
It was, no, not to make fun, but there were some people that just didn't have any background.
Right, maybe education.
And they had to be, the Army had to decide whether they could train them as a cannoneer or a truck driver
Right.
or something, or to release them.
So they didn't have to have a high school education?
I don't think that was,
That was not a requirement to be drafted?
no, I think it's a requirement now
Yeah.
among the military, but I think it was age and physical
Physical shape.
shape, yeah.
And basically, even for the physical shape, I think, didn't they took people of varying degrees and
Right.
could maybe use them somewhere?
And they called out the ones that they felt would not be able to be a good soldier. Anyway, that was, excuse me. That
So
was
when
pretty-
did you end up going over to overseas?
In May of 1943, we went over on a ship that was part of the French fleet. I don't know the name of it. It was a one-stacker, and we went over unescorted because we could go at 30 knots under forced draft. And we went across the North Atlantic, fishtailing all the way across. And it was a rough go, really. Even though it wasn't winter, we had some pretty rough seas. A lot of illness on it.
Because when you said North Atlantic, you were probably going up like by Iceland, Greenland, that area? Or not quite that far?
Well, do you want to hear a story about, we had a bunch of young Air Force officers that were trying, they were on the ship, and they were charming up the nurses that were there, always wearing their 1000 Mission Crush
Of course.
and a 45 under their arm. And I remember in the wardroom one day, one of the second lieutenants came down, and he leaned over and said, I've just been up to Sparks, that was the radio operator, and I know where we are. He said, we're passing the Ozarks. He meant the Azores, but those of us at Sheridan took bus that way.
The
Yeah, we're
Ozarks.
passing the Ozarks.
Oh, gee, bless his heart.
But it was the Azores, and then we headed north.
When you say a one-stacker, you mean there were not
Just
decks
one-
on top of each
no,
other?
No, one funnel.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were able to go a little bit faster because your weight wasn't quite so
Well, I
heavy?
don't know what the reason was. It was a top-heavy ship, but we sped it.
You went fast.
We speeded across the Atlantic. Yeah.
And you ended up where?
We landed. We went around the northern part of Ireland, and we landed the Mersey docks in Liverpool
Mhm.
on D-Day.
Wow. How did somebody tell you all it was
Well,
D-Day?
we heard the King of England make his
Ah.
announcement. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty neat. You're probably just as glad you weren't over there, though, right?
Yes, yeah.
That would have been pretty rough, right? Better to be in England right then.
Yeah, even, we went over from Southampton to Omaha Beach, and even we weren't under fire, and it was tough to get up that hill.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
That was the beach where the worst fighting
Yeah.
was, right?
Yeah.
And that was, when did you end up over there?
I think it was in August.
Of 44, so when, or 40,
Yeah.
okay, so it wasn't that much later.
Well, the worst of it was over there at that point.
Right, right. They'd gone inland pretty much at that point.
They were stalled at the hedgerows.
Yeah.
It was tough
Right.
getting through those, but once they broke out through St. Lo and then Patton was the lead force for us, and
Mm-hmm.
I think he had the third Army at that
Mhm.
point.
Although he wasn't the one that led the army that first, the first wave on D-Day. Wasn't that
No.
Omar Bradley?
Yeah, it was Bradley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Eisenhower, of course, behind it all. You ever meet Eisenhower?
No,
No, probably not many people did. Anyway, you were over in England, and what all did you do while you were over there?
well, we received troops from the States
Mm-hmm.
and prepared them for where they were going to go. Some were part of a division or an organization, and we sent them to that organization.
Okay, when you
And
say,
some were-
like, what do you mean exactly? They were part of an organization?
Well, they came in as they were part of an engineering company.
Okay, gotcha.
And we would have to send them to where that engineering
Right,
company was.
right.
And others were replacement. They were just attached, unassigned, and as there were casualties, they needed to be
Right,
sent
replaced,
into
right.
the line wherever they were needed.
So you just sent them on from there
Right.
to where they would be going? And you would sort of assign them according to what it
Well,
looked
we
like they should
had
do?
orders as to where they were going.
Okay,
And we just would see that they got transportation out.
gotcha.
As an interesting story, I can remember one soldier that we had sent. I didn't remember at the time, but we had sent him to the, I think it was the 813th Light Pump Engineering Company. And this was, I can't remember exactly when it was, but he was shipped out while there was still fighting in Normandy. And the war was almost over, and one of my sergeants brought this same guy, same soldier, in to me and said, "I think you better talk to this soldier." And this soldier, I don't remember his name, but he said, "Boy, am I glad to be here." He said, "You're the ones that sent me out to the 813th Light Engineering Ponton Company." And he said, "I'd never have found them." And he told us the story about, he said, so we got in, there was a roadblock and everybody scattered.
Gee.
He said, "I looked for anybody, any outfit." He said, "I ran into the so-and-so." He had it written down, name of the sergeant that was nice to him.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't know where the 813th Light Taunton Engineering Company was. He said they took care of it. He said, we had a heck of a fight. He said, we were in that town several times. I said, where was that? He said, St. Lo.
Oh, gee.
And then he got a ride with Patton. Turned out he was in almost every major battle in France, looking for the 813th Light Taunton Engineering Company. And we found it for him that day. And the war was, I can't remember whether it was all the way over or not, but he wasn't AWOL.
No.
He just was looking for his outfit.
Well, didn't that happen sometimes? I mean, at least in some of these movies we've seen where a person got lost and they just sort of joined another group.
Yep.
I mean, as long as it was your nationality, and sometimes even Americans join English groups.
I remember talking to a rifleman in the 90th Infantry, and they hit the beach on D-Day. And he was a rifleman, and he told me, and I don't know whether he was kidding me or not, but he told me that he never fired his piece, and he never saw a German.
Hmm. That's unusual. And
Yeah, he could have been pulling my leg, I don't know.
They were up in those little, weren't they in little encampments, the Germans, and the little, they were just standing out there, right? They were.
Oh no,
they were hidden.
They were dug in. They had pillboxes.
Pillbox. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe he didn't see an actual German. He probably heard some guns fired though.
But he said he never fired his.
He never
piece.
fired his, huh?
Well, you know, there's a lot of confusion.
Oh my gosh! I guess it was pretty confusing. The people I've talked to that have been there. But you were in England at that time, and then you went to France in August.
I think it was August, yeah.
And where were you over there in France?
Well, we landed on Omaha Beach.
Mm-hmm.
And we were there for a while. The next place we were was Le Mans. And then we managed to be in Paris right after the liberation. And Fleury-en-Bière, which was a castle that was formerly occupied by Cardinal Richelieu. And from there we went into the Vosges area of France, Neufchâteau, and then north to Aéroville, France, which is right on the Maginot Line, where France, Luxembourg, and Germany come together.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we were when the war ended.
Okay. But everywhere you were receiving these replacement individuals and sending them on out. So of course you had to keep moving in because that's where the divisions were.
We had to follow the troops.
Right. What was it like in Paris at that time?
It was celebration, incroyable, as the French would say. You know, they were very happy. And, there still had been some fighting in Paris, but at that point the Germans had cleared out, and I guess it was a miracle that Paris wasn't blown up by the Germans because they had orders to.
Right, wasn't it that one of their the general that was supposed to do it didn't do it, right? Because it was so beautiful.
As I understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is Paris burning? There was some kind of a book.
Yeah, there's a book about that.
Right. Well, that's a blessing because I understand it's really beautiful. I haven't seen it, but so anyway, then you just kept moving in as the troops moved in. Did you see much action? I mean, obviously you weren't involved in the infantry or the artillery, but did you
No,
experience any?
in England we had the V1s that were hitting, and then there was a little action during the bulge.
Right.
When there was a lot of confusion, the Germans had English-speaking soldiers in American uniforms.
Oh my gosh.
Doing as much damage as they could,
Ooh.
misdirecting traffic.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's interesting. I had never heard that before.
Oh, yeah. We'd have to ask if we saw a stranger who was in uniform, we'd engage him in a conversation about something like, who was Babe Ruth?
Yeah.
Because they could speak, the Germans could speak perfect English, but they wouldn't know some of the things that
any good American would know, right?
Right.
There you go.
So that was I wasn't in much danger.
I bet your mother was glad.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah. You were telling me a little story earlier that I thought was kind of interesting about the French.
Oh.
And I think that would be interesting to hear.
Well, we got to know a French family in Neuchâtel. It was a sister and brother and mother and father. And the brother was of military age and he had a close call with the Germans. But he had the usual Gallic sense of humor. And I said to them one time, I said, Jean, what did you think when our planes came over and bombed your town? He said, well, I knew that you were trying to hit the railroad station, so we all ran to the railroad station because we know you'd hit everything else. But there's a station. So, and of course the French were very happy to be liberated. They had lived under very trying conditions for about 4 years.
Right.
And I admire the fact that they were able to live under the Nazi rule.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, they didn't like it, but I guess they tried to fight them off, and I guess it didn't work out for them, and the English held, thank goodness for that. They held sway for a while. So we got in. You said you were over at France, and then did you actually get into Germany?
Yes. After the war was over in both Europe and the Pacific, I was transferred to Marburg, Germany, and appointed as assistant adjutant for the 3rd Replacement Depot. And that's where I spent the rest of my time until I came home.
So at that point, you were essentially sending replacements to the Army of Occupation there in Germany?
What we were doing was mostly sending people home. After the requirements for Pacific were stopped, we were then part of the process in sending troops home. And if you remember, they had a point score that was based on the amount of time you were overseas, the amount of time you were in the Army, and also I think there was a score that you would get if you were married and had dependents.
Okay.
So I think I had 58 points when I was sent home. So the ones that had more points went home before I did. But the time that we were in Germany, it was, well, we all had a chance to see some of the country. I got a chance to go to Switzerland for just for a week, but that was wonderful. And I had a Swiss grandmother, and I had the fantasy of thinking I would go try to find the family.
Oh, gee.
And it didn't happen then, but it did. It did many years later.
Oh, nice. That's really interesting. So then you came home
Right.
when you had enough points.
Right.
And how many points did you need to come home?
I had 58 at the time. Yeah.
Okay. Did you feel like, as you look at your service as a whole, did you feel like it was a beneficial experience in your life? I mean, I get different feedback on that.
Oh, indeed. I feel very fortunate. I got the wanderlust to travel. As a matter of fact, at Marburg, I met my future wife. She was in the American Red Cross in the clubmobile.
That's pretty neat.
And we met at a birthday party, and later we were married. And we're living happily ever after.
How many years have you been married?
It'll be 60 years in February.
That's great. And she's an American too. She was with the American Red Cross.
American Red Cross, yeah. In the clubmobile.
Okay.
She drove a 2.5-ton truck around to the units that were too far away to come to the Red Cross clubs.
Okay.
Coffee and donuts. Where are you from, soldier?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so you actually married one of those gals.
Yeah,
That's
right.
pretty cool. So I just wondered how you felt when President Roosevelt died. I asked this of other veterans. Just your reaction.
Well, it was a sad day. I don't know what to say except that it just was.
Was it a shock?
Well, actually, I had almost the same time I got word that one of my best friends had died on Okinawa.
Oh, gee.
And I guess I was pretty unhappy about that.
Right.
I really don't. I know afterwards we were all sorry that near the end of his life he had a pretty tough go with
Right.
having to deal with Stalin and that bunch.
Right.
I think Yalta was probably didn't help his health any.
No. I imagine it was pretty rough. How did you feel about, I know you served in the European theater, but how did you feel about the dropping of the atomic bombs to end the war?
Well, I think it saved lives. I think it was a tough decision for Truman to make, but he made it. And, I happened to have a classmate, Bob Meader, who was one of on Doolittle's raid, and he was taken prisoner and executed over in Japan. So I had a sort of a intense dislike for the Japanese.
Yeah. So what have you done since then?
Well, I came home and went to work for Remington Rand. And my wife had been with IBM, and so that was a no-no. Later, worked for General Motors for 10 years, and I decided to go into business for myself. And I went into the insurance business
Mm.
and did very well. And after a few years, Dorothy and I went back to the scene of the crime. We started doing some traveling. We've been inveterate travelers, we're told, since then. We've been in every state but South Dakota.
Well, you'll have to get there.
And I don't know whether I'll ever do it now. And we have been, I happen to know this because at one of the alumni meetings at Miami, we were sent a questionnaire, how many countries have you been in since you graduated? And at that point, I was in 73.
Oh my gosh.
And haven't been in too many more than that since then. We stopped traveling after 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
We did make one trip to Germany and Austria for the Christmas markets.
Mm.
Got to see the Vienna Boys Choir on Christmas morning.
Well, I bet that was neat.
But we haven't done much since we, as a matter of fact, Dorothy and I lived in Sarasota for about 17 years. After I retired, we were down there.
Mm.
I came back here because we have 2 children that are still here. I
Okay.
came back by air ambulance. I was
Okay.
in the Sarasota Memorial Hospital with all kinds of, I had 5 deadly diseases.
5 days, and here you are. So.
I came up by air ambulance to Christ Hospital, and Dr. Karyakis has been, he saved my bacon.
Well, that's good. And so you have some children here in the area?
Bill lives in Terrace Park. He's a Miami graduate. Bob is in Chicago. He's retired. He's a Duke graduate, and my daughter lives in Indian Hill, and she graduated from Wake Forest.
Mm.
And their my daughter's 2 twin boys were sophomores, they're juniors at Wake Forest now.
Oh, okay. Well, that's wonderful.
And my son's boys, one graduated from Xavier and the other from, he's a senior at Jacksonville College in Jacksonville, Florida.
So it sounds like things have gone pretty well for you.
And we have one granddaughter who's a junior at Indian Hill High School.
Mm.
Saw her today. It's her 17th birthday today.
Oh, really? Oh, that's your heart.
So I was fortunate that I had this date. I could go see her after she was out of school and come here
Oh, that's
and talk to
great.
you.
It's
about
super. Have you told your family much about your experiences?
Well, not really. Some of the grandchildren during high school days, they called up and asked about things. And no, I haven't really sat down, and I probably should do that.
Right, write it down for them at least.
Yeah, everyone should.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. I know that there are a lot of things about my family that I would like to know, and I never asked them. It's too
Right.
late.
Yep, I know what you're saying. Is there anything you would like to say to future generations, just about your experiences and what you all did for your country?
Well, I was a very minor part of what I did, and I think we all should have a feeling of gratitude to be living in this country, and we should do whatever we can to keep it the way it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Is there
Thank you.
anything else you would like to share?
Well, I don't know. ask me a question, maybe I could respond.
I don't know, I can't really think of anything else.
It's when you were in the barracks.
Oh. You mean, okay, there's a picture of me when I was.
What was barracks like?
We had several sergeants that were, I guess I could just say they were martinets. They made sure that we learned how to scrub the barracks. Not once, not twice, but until they were tired of sending us back in to do it. As one of the sergeants, he was a staff sergeant at the time, I ran into after I was commissioned, and he was still a staff sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
And I had marched a company down to take showers. This was in Europe. And we all took a shower. And when I put my uniform back on, he was sort of taken aback because I was one of his buck privates that he disciplined during the time that I was in basic training.
So did you get picked to go to OCS, or did you?
I got picked.
Yeah.
I was lucky.
You get picked to do that.
There was an interesting thing. A lot of that particular group was a pretty, I might say, pretty elite group. And there was some politicking that went on to get there. We had, when we first arrived, and we all were assembled, and they called the roll, everybody was candidate something. And they got the candidate O'Keefe, and two guys answered. Two soldiers said, "Here, sir." So then it's candidate Joseph O'Keefe. "Here, sir." Candidate Joseph J. O'Keefe. They both answered. And the one O'Keefe didn't know why he was there. He had been in ordnance in Fort Holabird, Maryland. But somebody went to the Pentagon and looked up John Joseph O'Keefe because they wanted him to get to OCS. They grabbed the wrong one. Now they graduate and they have an Army serial number that's one digit apart.
Oh
so
my
the two
gosh.
Second Lieutenant John Joseph O'Keefe with an Army serial number of just one digit apart. They were in Chicago with me after graduation, and they were supposed to go to be sent overseas. And they pulled them off the order because they thought it was a mistake. They had two Second Lieutenant John Joseph O'Keefe with a serial number that didn't match. They pulled them both off. They eventually went, but it was an interesting thing.
That is
And
bizarre.
they both graduated. And I had one of the candidates that kept getting a gig. He said to me one time, let's go down to Washington. I have an uncle that lives there. So we went down. There was Sam Rayburn, who was the Speaker of the House.
Mm-hmm.
Another candidate was the son of the governor of Maryland. We all hooted when he was transferred to the Second Service Command in Baltimore, Maryland. We knew there was a little politics going on.
I think so, right. Did you meet Sam Rayburn then?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when he was Speaker in the House. It was a long time.
Yeah.
I'm sure your children are proud of your service too. Did any of them go do any
No, none was,
military?
they were, they could have been drafted to Vietnam, but they weren't. And of course, Nancy wouldn't
Right.
be involved, but both Bill and Bob were of that age. But we're not.
Not
fortunately,
nearly,
didn't have
not
to make a
nearly as
decision.
many, because there were 16 million of you, and there were, I don't think they drafted nearly as many in the Vietnam era.
And unfortunately, the veterans of that era didn't come back to the same.
I know, to the
Same,
jubilant
yeah.
welcome that you
Yeah.
all did, right?
It wasn't their fault,
Absolutely not. And you,
Okay.
and they actually had a higher casualty percentage, you know, percentage-wise.
Yeah. Yeah. It was,
Because I think we took pretty good care of our people, you know.
yep. Okay.
Well, I have enjoyed talking to you.
It's my pleasure.
It's always interesting. I always
Certainly.
enjoy these interviews.
Okay. I hope that I've added a little bit to
Yeah.
I've been to the archives in Washington, look up some, when my father was in the Navy in the Spanish-American War. It was
Oh, my
amazing,
gosh.
amazing how much information there is there.
The Spanish-American War. It only lasted a few months. Did you know that? It's kind of interesting. There was just something in the paper. There's 25 veterans left from World War I. 25.
25.
No Spanish-American, naturally.
Yeah.
But they were taking the different lengths of the
Yeah.
wars. This one going on now is actually one of the longer ones.
That's right, it's longer than World War II.
Yep, it just
Yeah.
passed it, right.
Yeah.
Vietnam was the longest, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Although they never really called it a war, but it was.
Okay.
Hmm.
Well, does this end the interview then?
I think she turned it off.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, okay.
That's okay.
I'll do it now.